Exactly. So what I'm saying is it was a Faustian bargain in which you get economic benefits and at the same time you're in bed with the racists and you're on your own team.
Welcome to the Bald Brad Show. In this Sunday episode, we're reacting to a clip here of Dinesh D'Souza destroying this liberal professor on history, more specifically regarding the big switch. Now, some of us might not remember how the big switch was taught to us, so I want to cover that in a brief summary real quick before we jump into the video itself, because it will help with our understanding of what's actually taking place through this video. So in the middle school and high school, as well as university levels, these liberal educators are teaching our kids that the racist Democrats became Republicans and the non-racist Republicans became Democrats, and that's how the party lines are set up today. Well, that's holistically incorrect, as well as factually incorrect. Dinesh D'Souza clears that all up for us and gives us the correct side of history, rather than the Democrats and the liberal educators giving us the revisionist side of history, which is what we were taught. Without further ado, folks, hit that like and subscribe button. Leave us a short, sweet comment down below. Let's go ahead and roll it.
Aren't you insulting all the intelligent people here and the 80% of African Americans who are Democrats by claiming that the current Democratic Party has anything to do with that Dixiecrat party from 50 years ago that was trying to stop them from voting? Aren't you conflating the word Democrat with progressive? They have utterly nothing to do with each other. The current Democratic Party has absolutely none of those values from 50 years ago, and you're pretending that they are guilty of something. Aren't you trying to claim that Jesse Jackson is a dupe and shouldn't be supporting the Democratic Party because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican and freed the slaves?
The Democratic Party was the party of the Dixiecrats all the way through the 60s. And if what you say is true, that the blacks made a switch to their racial friends, it would appear that the black switch would have to come in the 70s and 80s, when blacks see these racists are now moving over there, so it makes sense for us to move over here. But in reality, blacks moved overwhelmingly to the Democratic Party in the 1930s. The black vote went from about 15% Democratic to about 70% Democratic within 4 years.
In the places they could vote.
That's right, but
which was the North.
Also in the
Republican. Jackie Robinson was a Republican for darn good reason.
That's absolutely right. But here's what I'm getting at.
It wouldn't be today.
Well, we can debate Jackie Robinson, because it's always difficult to know what dead people would say. If Martin Luther King were alive today, Martin Luther King isn't alive today. Okay, but here's the point I'm getting at. The reason that blacks switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party had everything to do with the benefits of the New Deal and nothing to do with racism. In fact, in the North. Yes, and in the South, too, blacks switched to the Democratic Party. It's not that blacks couldn't vote in the South. They said there were all kinds of barriers to black voting.
They couldn't vote.
Under FDR, there was blacks couldn't vote in the South at all. No blacks voted in the South.
Very, very few.
How many?
Absolutely.
How many?
I don't know.
Okay, I thought so. Look, there were all kinds of poll taxes and barriers imposed by the Democrats on the black vote until the Democrats realized that they could get the black vote by offering jobs, welfare, retirement programs. Are you telling me that FDR in the South was telling blacks who were voting for the Democrats, you can't vote? Not true. Not true. Blacks in the North and the South switched to the Democratic Party because of New Deal benefits. Many of them were very sad about doing it because they were leaving the party of emancipation and Lincoln and flinging themselves into the party of the Ku Klux Klan and the Dixiecrats who were in the South and were in the Democratic Party. Exactly. So what I'm saying is it was a Faustian bargain in which you get economic benefits and at the same time you're in bed with the racists and you're on your own team. And I'm saying that's American history. Now, whites began to switch to the Republican Party, but much later. Whites began to switch to the Republican Party in droves in the 70s and 80s. Now, here's the point. If you look at racial opinion in the South, and there's a voluminous body of data on this, as racism in the South dramatically declines, the Southern identification with the Republican Party begins to increase. There's an opposite track. Racism is declining in the South, and whites begin to move to the Republican Party. In fact, two scholars who've written a book about this trace that the least racist Southerners all became Republicans. That the poor white racist Democrat never became a Republican. He was a dug-in Democrat to the end of his days. So the Democratic Party remained the party of racism. And as the South became less agrarian, more prosperous, industry came to the South, the post-industrial society, the Republican appeal of equal opportunity, free markets, prosperity, appealed to Southerners, and that's why they... So what I'm getting at is that the progressives have sold the South on a guilt trip. Even this whole thing about, the Civil War was really about slavery and the South did slavery. Wait a minute. Again, the Northern Democrats protected slavery. The Civil War, the fight over slavery, was between the Democratic Party, North and South, that protected it, and the Republican Party, which only was in the North, that opposed it. That's what that fight was about. It wasn't just... The North-South thing is now a disguise to hide the responsibility of a major political party that was the party of slavery for 100 years. True or false?
Dang, and that's his book right there, folks. Death of a Nation. I actually have a copy of it right here. Fabulous documentary. I haven't seen the documentary. I just read the books. I got about 3 or 4 Dinesh D'Souza books. If you enjoyed that, I talk a lot about this history in our book, Trojan Horse, How the Left is Destroying America. We go into great detail on all this stuff. We give updated statistics as well. This whole idea is an outgrowth of our education system, and Dinesh D'Souza spots it out so perfectly of going, well, we just call it the North and South, but it's the Democratic North and South versus the North Republicans. We don't teach that in today's education system. And if we do, we just gloss over it relatively quickly, which is why I wanted to bring awareness to this argument, because so many of us, including myself, were taught revisionist history in our education system. And sometimes it is at the fault of our history teachers, but sometimes it isn't, because they were fed the same BS as well. And now they're teaching it to everybody else, which you see from this professor. And if you look at the idea of the Dixiecrat Party, all of them were predominantly racist. And like he mentioned, they stayed racist all the way through the rest of their lives. Well, how does this come in formation of today's party lines? If you saw FDR's New Deal of the 1930s and so forth, of when the blacks predominantly became part of the Democrat Party to grab a hold of those New Deal benefits that he listed out, we see that in today's party lines, where the Dixiecrats were trying to make sure that blacks could not have the right to vote, and that those blacks moved into the Democrat Party for those New Deal benefits in bed with the racists. And we see that today, not so much so the Democrat Party is trying to remove the right to vote. They want blacks to vote for them and people of color, but they're still offering them those same style of benefits that FDR was giving them all the way back when, almost 100 years ago. So that's where they're at now, where they're basically, what Dinesh D'Souza and Candace Owens talk about in their books, is offering them not a physical plantation like we saw way back when, but more so of a metaphorical plantation, in the same way FDR built that metaphorical plantation way back when to encapsulate that vote from the blacks in the Democrat Party. The big switch that he's referring to here, where the non-racist whites became Republicans from the South, the Democratic South, as well as some in the Democratic North, happened far later in history, about the 70s or 80s, when racism was on an exponential decline, which he laid out so perfectly here. The problem is, a lot of times these history professors or these history teachers, they don't know history necessarily in a holistic view. And if they do, they don't know where to zoom in and how to make those connections for themselves or their students in the classroom. And that's where we fall short. Nor do they want to be specific, because a lot of these educators, and that's okay if some of them are Democrat. There's nothing wrong with that. They're still Americans, but they don't want to portray themselves to be in bed with a party that's historically a party of racism and ultimately hurting people of color in a holistic viewpoint. where they go, oh, I'm a trash on Democrats for their history, but I myself is a Democrat. And they try to get away with it by not being specific in history, and that's why they call it the North and South. Furthermore, another point that they get wrong here, and I've seen this time and time again from professors as well as teachers, and some of them are my friends that are teachers in the high school level system, is this idea that the Nazis were the right-wing party, that the Nazis are the Republican Party of America. So what they're doing is they're seeing this idea of like, oh, well, because they're right-wing in history, and that's how they were labeled, is that, well, that converts directly over to the right wing of the parties in America. Right wing is predominantly Republican. The issue is that that's incorrect. It's incorrect because if you can't look at the way somebody labeled something, you have to look at ideology. And that ideology is flip-flopped, where the Nazis had a leftist viewpoint ideology, which would correlate to the leftist viewpoint here in America, which is what we see from the leftists. So just because it's right-wing in Nazi Germany does not directly correlate to the right-wing party here of the Republican Party in America. So it's another form of them getting it wrong. And so I wanted to bring awareness to you so that we can have our history correct or revised in a way from the wrong revisionist history that we were taught in our education. Again, I highly recommend any of Dinesh D'Souza's books. Again, I got a lot here, just all that I can grab with one hand, but The Big Lie is great. Big Lie, Death of the Nation. This is kind of his newer one, Socialism of America. Again, if you want kind of a synopsis of this whole thing, I highly recommend you pick up my book, Trojan Horse, How the Left is Destroying America. It's a quick read. It's a great read, but we take you through everything of how the progressive left is destroying this country from the inside out in the same way that the Greeks utilized the Trojan horse to destroy the great city of Troy from the inside out. If we don't bring awareness to it now, we're not going to have a country later on. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Bald Brad Show. We'll be back here tomorrow with more news, headlines, and breaking information for you tomorrow here on The Bald Brad Show.